What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Brendan Schaub fires back at Dana White over recent criticism. The bitter rivalry between UFC president Dana White and former UFC heavyweight Brendan Schaub reared its ugly head this week when Schaub and former UFC welterweight champion Pat Miletich both threw out the same theory on why Nate Diaz was booked to fight Tony Ferguson on such short notice before UFC 279. Both men theorized that the UFC switched things up in the main event because the pay-per-view event wasn't trending well due to the lopsided predictions for the main event, a notion that UFC president Dana White ripped to shreds following Dana White's Contender Series this week. White initially went off on Miletich, explaining that he saw a report with the former champ's ridiculous theory.
Pat Miletich was saying that this thing was, we told Khamzat not to make weight because we weren't selling tickets and we weren't. The fucking show was sold out going into that day of the weigh-ins. I don't know if Pat really said that, but if he did, he has to be the dumbest on the planet.
Before he was then informed that it was Schaub who proposed the theory of the UFC switching up the fights because the event wasn't projected to do well. After being told that it was Schaub's theory, White apologized to Miletich before then stating with a laugh that it made sense Schaub was the one who suggested the wild hypothetical.
Oh, it wasn't Pat Miletich? I apologize to Pat Miletich then. That makes sense. Bye.
While White was not wrong in his criticism of Miletich given that the Croatian sensation had also proposed this theory, his comments towards Schaub caught the attention of the former fighter, who fired back in a lengthy statement. Schaub didn't pull punches, criticizing the low-budget Vince McMahon for everything from the way he dresses and talks to the fact that the UFC president relied on money from the Fertitta brothers to buy the UFC 20 years ago. In addition, Schaub accused White of being deceptive when it comes to the success of UFC events, while also shedding light on the always hot topic of fighter pay in MMA. While there has been no response from White yet, Schaub's comments likely won't sit too well with the outspoken UFC president. Stay tuned to the MMA Zone for updates. Fighters left hanging after UFC inks new shoe deal. Throughout the course of the build-up to UFC 279, fight fans were repeatedly fed Project Rock commercials with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson talking about his brand's footwear collaboration with the UFC. As the events of the chaotic week played out, more and more fighters were spotted wearing Project Rock shoes and slides during promotional appearances. While the commercial features nearly 3 full minutes of UFC fighters praising the footwear brand, news has now surfaced from Bloody Elbow that reveals that fighters won't actually be paid anything from the deal. Considering the fact that fighters have been reportedly required to do interviews with Johnson's company in order to get the necessary footage for the commercials that aired during Fight Week, many have begun to criticize the former WWE champion and the UFC brass for not sharing profits with fighters. This likely explains why Nate Diaz took the opportunity to criticize the shoes during an ESPN interview, revealing that he was forced to wear them.
These shoes suck. Look at these shoes. They make me put shit on.
Sponsors, you don't hear that. Guys,
These shoes.
While many were quick to vilify Johnson in the UFC, streaking prospect Terrence McKinney looked to peacefully negotiate on behalf of the fighters regarding the deal, saying, "If you're a fan of what we do, make the deal favorable for the ones modeling your shoe. I get it's not your fault or your business doing it to us, but show us the love you think you are. Get in our corner and support us." Only time will tell whether UFC fighters receive a piece of the pie for the partnership, or if the UFC is in for a repeat of their Rebooked deal that garnered considerable criticism for a lack of profit sharing with fighters. Next up, Dana White praises Khamzat Chimaev following chaotic UFC 279 fight week. When news broke last week that Khamzat Chimaev was going to miss weight by nearly 10 pounds, many began to wonder what his relationship with the UFC would look like going forward. Considering the promotion has often forced fighters who missed weight by a considerable amount to move divisions, the general sentiment was that the promotion would likely make the Chechen fighter move up in weight while opting to keep him out of main event fights for the foreseeable future. According to UFC president Dana White, however, Chimaev didn't have too shabby of a week despite missing weight and starting a scuffle backstage that resulted in the cancellation of the UFC 279 press conference. He spoke following this week's Dana White's Contender Series episode saying,
"It was a nutty week. I mean, the whole week was nutty in every way that it could possibly be nutty. But I wouldn't say by any stretch that it was a bad week for Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, he came in and I mean, you all know what I think about Kevin Holland and what I think of him as a person and as a fighter. And goddamn, Khamzat made that look easy and very quick. So he's an absolute beast.
While it sounds as though Chimaev's next fight will be at middleweight, the UFC president hasn't given any indication that Chimaev will be barred from fighting at 170 pounds in the future despite the miss in weight. What did you make of the chaos that ensued during the UFC 279 fight week? Did your opinion of Khamzat Chimaev change as the week went on? Give us your thoughts in the comment section down below, and before we continue, make sure you give that like button some love and be sure to subscribe to the MMA Zone for all of the latest news. Chael Sonnen rallies fans to Tony Ferguson's side after latest loss. When news broke several weeks ago that Tony Ferguson would be making a quick return to the octagon following his devastating KO loss at the hands of Michael Chandler earlier this year, many couldn't help but notice the must-win position Ferguson was in. After dropping 4 straight wins over 2 years, Ferguson's career had undeniably taken a steep nosedive. With a tough matchup against the heavy-hitting Li Jingliang, many wondered whether Ferguson would be able to find success. However, a last-minute change in opponents gave Ferguson the opportunity to share the octagon with Nate Diaz in a 5-round main event scrap. While Ferguson managed to find success with leg kicks during the bout, an ill-advised takedown landed the former interim champ in a fight-ending guillotine choke. Following the loss, many began to call for the Ultimate Fighter 13 winner to retire from the sport in the midst of his 5-fight skid. Former middleweight title challenger Chael Sonnen does not believe that should be the case. During a recent podcast episode, Sonnen spoke about the situation Ferguson finds himself in after his short notice defeat.
And before we begin to shovel in the last piles of dirt on the grave of Tony's career, we don't punish guys for taking risks. Tony Ferguson went up to 170 pounds. He packed a bag, he made a tough decision, he went out to Albuquerque, he worked hard, he took risks. And yesterday, Friday, a question and a proposal was presented to him that was not in the plans, and he said yes.
Sonnen also explained that before throwing criticism Ferguson's way, fans and media members should think twice because of the impact it could have on both El Cucuy and the UFC going forward. For what it's worth, Ferguson stated following the fight that while he feels he's back in a good way at welterweight, he does believe that his body needs time to adjust to the move to 170 pounds after spending most of his UFC career at lightweight. Taking Sonnen's comments and Ferguson's recent performance into account, do you believe it's time for El Cucuy to hang up the gloves? Or should he look to fight fellow veterans in the twilight of their careers like Robbie Lawler, as some fans have suggested? Give us your thoughts down below. Now for our breaking news story of the day, we have UFC commentator Joe Rogan breaking silence on his UFC contract. Here's what he had to say on his recent podcast.
And between the two of you, without compromising each other, you do a brilliant job. If you left the show, I would be very upset.
Well, if Dana leaves,
as a fan,
if Dana leaves, I'm gone. That's in my contract.
There is no show without Dana White.
No.
He's take it down 60%.
Yeah, what he does is very different.
He knows what the fighters are. He knows what their drama is.
He's a real guy all day long.
It's crazy that Joe Rogan and Dana White will leave the UFC together based on the contract that Joe has with the UFC. What do you think about Joe Rogan's contract? Let us know in the comment section down below. Last up, Jared Cannonier vs. Sean Strickland rebooked for December. A pivotal middleweight showdown between former title challenger Jared Cannonier and top-ranked middleweight Sean Strickland has been rebooked for December 17th. The pair were previously set to share the octagon in a main event bout back in October. However, a gruesome infection in one of Strickland's fingers that made the rounds on social media forced the bout to be cancelled. The fight will be a pivotal one for both men as they hope to move closer to a middleweight title shot. For Cannonier, the fight will be his first since dropping a unanimous decision to reigning middleweight champion Israel Adesanya in the main event of UFC 276, and will serve as his first opportunity to return to the win column after going 6-2 since dropping to middleweight. On the flip side, polarizing UFC veteran Sean Strickland will be looking to return to the win column for the first time since being brutally knocked out at the hands of Alex Pereira in a #1 contender bout in the co-main event of UFC 276. The bout is expected to headline the December 17th Fight Night event, which will likely take place at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. So far, the event is also set to play host to a middleweight showdown between fan favorites Julian Marquez and Deron Winn, in addition to a bantamweight scrap between Sergey Morozov and Journey Nusan. However, given the fact that the card is rapidly approaching, expect fight announcements to begin surfacing sooner rather than later. Do you have any matchups you want to see take place on the card? Give us some potential fights in the comments down below. Thanks so much for joining us today. What do you make of what's going on in the fight world? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all of the latest news from the MMA zone. See you next time.